A woman can lose her husband in the morning and still learn by sunset who was waiting for his money. The day we buried Peter Whitmore, I stood beside his casket in a black wool dress I had owned for 12 years, listening to people tell me what a good man my husband had been, as if I needed reminding. 48 years of marriage does not fit into a condolence line. It lives in coffee cups left on the kitchen counter, in the worn side of a mattress, in the way one chair at the breakfast table suddenly looks too empty to touch. The service was held at a small stone church in Greenwich, Connecticut, the kind of place where people lower their voices even when they have nothing kind to say. Peter had built a real estate company from one modest office and 2 second-hand desks, and by the time his heart finally gave out, the estate was worth just over $28 million. Everyone in that church knew the number, or thought they did. I could feel it moving through the room in glances, in whispers, in hands that held mine a little too long. My son, Daniel, stood near the front pew, pale and stiff in his navy suit. He looked broken, but not in the way I expected. He looked frightened. Beside him, my daughter-in-law, Claire, dabbed the corner of her eye with a white tissue that never seemed to get wet. She had always been beautiful in a polished, expensive way, with soft blonde hair, pearl earrings, and a smile she could turn on like a lamp. That day, she wore grief like one of her tailored coats. It fit, but it did not warm her. During the reception at our house afterward, neighbors brought casseroles, business partners murmured about Peter's legacy, and old friends touched my shoulder as if I might shatter. I did not shatter. I watched. From across the living room, I saw Claire lean close to Daniel near the hallway leading to Peter's office. Her voice was low, but grief makes a house quiet in strange places. I heard every word. Did your father leave the office key anywhere? Daniel glanced toward me, then away. Not now, he whispered. Claire's smile tightened. We cannot wait too long. I looked down at the untouched cup of tea in my hands. The steam had vanished. Something inside me went just as still. They thought I was too old, too stunned, too heartbroken to notice the hunger behind their manners. They did not know Peter had noticed it first. They did not know about the envelope in Margaret Ellis's safe, or the clause he had added 6 months before he died. They did not know that the more quietly I stood there, the more clearly I was beginning to hear them. So I said nothing. I let Claire organize the sympathy cards. I let Daniel avoid my eyes. I let them believe widowhood had made me weak. And that was the first mistake they made. By the next morning, the house had already begun to feel less like mine. Not because Peter was gone, though his absence sat in every room like winter air, but because Claire moved through it as if she had been waiting years to take inventory. She arrived at 9 o'clock sharp with 2 cardboard storage boxes, a leather planner, and a voice so soft it made every sentence sound rehearsed. Eleanor, you should not worry about anything practical right now, she said, setting her purse on my kitchen island without asking. Daniel and I will handle the mail, the bills, the calls, all of it. You need rest. Rest. That was the word people used when they wanted a grieving woman to stop paying attention. Daniel stood behind her, holding a travel mug from the coffee shop he liked in town. He kissed my cheek, but his eyes landed somewhere over my shoulder. I wanted to ask him when he had become a visitor in the house where I had measured his height against the pantry door every September until he was 16. Instead, I folded Peter's reading glasses and placed them beside the newspaper he would never finish. Your father always handled the business papers in his office, I said. Claire turned at once. Too quickly. Exactly. That is why we should organize everything before things get misplaced. She smiled, but her fingers were already near the hallway drawer where Peter used to keep old keys, batteries, and restaurant matchbooks from trips we had taken 30 years ago. I watched her open it. She moved a stack of envelopes, lifted the small brass dish, then closed the drawer when she saw me looking. I was only trying to be useful, she said. I nodded. Useful people usually ask first. Daniel cleared his throat. Mom, Claire is just trying to help. There it was. The sentence that had protected her for 12 years. Claire was just trying to help when she changed Thanksgiving dinner from my house to hers. Claire was just trying to help when she convinced Daniel I was too tired to babysit my own grandchildren. Claire was just trying to help when she started answering questions that were meant for me. I walked to the sink and rinsed a cup that was already clean. The water ran warm over my hands. My wedding ring felt loose, as if even my body understood something had shifted. Behind me, Claire began sorting through the sympathy cards on the counter, separating the handwritten notes from the ones that looked expensive. Some of these people were connected to Peter's company, she said. We should make a list. I already know who they are, I replied. She paused. Of course. But her tone said she did not believe me. Later that afternoon, I found her standing outside Peter's office door with Daniel beside her. The door was locked. Peter had locked it the night before he went to the hospital, something he had never done in our marriage. Daniel had one hand in his pocket, shoulders tight. Claire leaned toward him and whispered, "There has to be another key." This time I did not pretend I had not heard. I stepped into the hallway, slow enough that both of them had time to look guilty. Peter kept many things safe, I said. Not because he was secretive, but because he knew the difference between family and appetite. Claire's face changed for only a second. Then the smile returned, polished and pale. Daniel looked at the floor. That hurt more than her greed. A stranger can reach for your home, and you can stop her. But when your own son stands beside her holding the door open, something inside you goes quiet in a way that no funeral can explain. 1 week after the funeral, Claire invited me to dinner in my own dining room. She called it a family meal, as if the word family could soften the shape of what she had planned. I knew before I came downstairs that it was not about comfort. The table was set too carefully. The silver had been polished, the linen napkins were folded into neat triangles, and the bottle of Cabernet Peter saved for anniversaries stood open beside Daniel's chair. Claire had never opened wine in my home without asking. That evening, she did. I paused in the doorway and saw her glance at Daniel. Quick and sharp, the way a person looks at someone before a performance begins. "Eleanor," she said, smiling as if she had not spent the past week measuring my life by drawers and documents. "I made your favorite roasted chicken." It was not my favorite. It was Daniel's. I sat at the head of the table because it had been my seat for 48 years. Claire's smile tightened, but she said nothing. Daniel poured water into my glass and spilled a little beside the plate. His hands shook. That was when I understood he knew enough to feel ashamed, but not enough to stop. For the first 15 minutes, they spoke in soft voices about small things. The weather, the flowers at the service, a neighbor who had brought a peach cobbler. I answered when necessary and cut my food into small pieces I did not eat. The house was too quiet around us. Peter's chair sat empty across from me, and every time Daniel looked at it, his face closed like a door. Then Claire placed her fork down with delicate care. "Eleanor, Daniel and I have been talking." I looked at my son, but he was staring at his plate. "About what?" Claire reached across the table and touched my wrist. Her hand was cool. "About you. About what is best for you now. This house is almost 7,000 square feet. The taxes alone are overwhelming, and with Peter gone, it is simply too much for one woman to manage. One woman, not his wife. Not the woman who signed the first office lease with him. Not the woman who spent decades turning risk into stability while raising their only child. Just one woman, sitting in a house Claire wanted to rename as a burden. Daniel finally lifted his eyes. "Mom, we only want to make things easier." He slid a cream-colored envelope across the table. It stopped beside my water glass. I did not touch it. "What is this?" I asked. Claire answered before he could. "A temporary financial authorization. Nothing dramatic. It would allow Daniel to help with estate matters until you feel stronger." I looked at the envelope, then at her pearl earrings, then at Daniel's lowered shoulders. "And who prepared it?" Claire blinked once. "A consultant recommended someone. Not Margaret Ellis." I asked. Daniel's face changed. Claire's fingers curled around her napkin. "Margaret has handled Peter's legal affairs for 30 years, I said. If this were truly for my protection, her name would be on it. The silence that followed was small, but complete. Even the old grandfather clock in the hallway seemed louder. Claire recovered first. "Eleanor, you are grieving. It is normal to be suspicious." I smiled then, not warmly, not cruelly, just enough for her to see that I was still in the room. "Did your father tell you to bring this to me, Daniel?" He opened his mouth, but no words came out. That was the answer. I folded my hands in my lap and left the envelope untouched. In that moment, I did not feel powerful. I felt old. I felt tired. But I also felt something I had not felt since Peter died. Clear. After dinner, Claire cleared the plates as if the evening had gone exactly as she intended, but I could hear the tension in the way porcelain touched porcelain. Daniel offered to help, then did not move. He sat with both hands around his glass, staring at the ring of water on the tablecloth. I had seen that look when he was 10 years old and broke Peter's favorite fishing reel, waiting for someone else to confess first. Claire returned from the kitchen with coffee none of us wanted. She set a cup in front of me and said, "You know, Peter always wanted Daniel to take over everything quickly. He told us the family company should never sit in limbo." The words landed softly, but something inside me straightened. Peter hated the phrase takeover. He used to say stewardship, never ownership. He believed money revealed character faster than hardship did, and he had spent the last 2 years watching Daniel become easier to guide and Claire become harder to ignore. I lifted my coffee cup, though I did not drink. "When did he tell you that?" Claire blinked. "What?" "That Peter wanted Daniel to take over everything quickly. When did he say it?" Daniel looked at his wife then, really looked at her, and for the first time that evening I saw fear pass between them like a folded note. Claire smiled. "I do not remember the exact day. Your husband and I had many conversations about the future. Your husband, not Peter, not Dad, not his father." She was trying to sound intimate with his intentions, as though closeness to his plans could replace truth. I placed my cup back on the saucer. Peter did not discuss company succession without Margaret Ellis present. Claire's expression stayed pleasant, but the color moved out of her cheeks. "Maybe he did not want to trouble you with every detail." There it was, the small sentence that opened the wall. Not a shout, not an accusation, just a careful little insult dressed as concern. I was the widow now, the elderly woman they expected to guide gently away from the rooms where decisions were made. But I remembered Peter's final week with terrible clarity. The office door locked. The password changed. The stack of mail he moved from the kitchen counter to his desk. The way he had sat beside me one evening, watching rain slide down the windows, and said, "Eleanor, if anyone rushes you after I am gone, call Margaret before you answer." I had scolded him for talking like that. He had taken my hand and kissed the knuckles, a habit from our younger days, and said, "Promise me." At the time, I thought it was fear. Now I understood it was preparation. Claire leaned back in her chair. "We are only trying to honor what Peter would have wanted." I looked at Daniel. "Do you know what your father wanted?" His mouth tightened. He looked tired, but tired is not the same as innocent. "Mom, this is hard for everyone," he said. That is not an answer. The grandfather clock struck 9 in the hallway. Each chime seemed to separate the old life from this new one. I rose slowly and picked up the unopened envelope from the table. Claire watched my hand as if the paper belonged to her already. I carried it to the sideboard and placed it beneath a silver candlestick where it could remain visible and unsigned. "I will speak with Margaret in the morning," I said. Claire stood too quickly. "There is no need to involve lawyers over a simple family matter." I turned toward her. "When money is simple, people do not whisper outside locked doors." Daniel flinched. Claire did not. That told me more than any confession could have. That night, after they left, I went into the kitchen and found the coffee pot still half full. Claire had washed the cups, but left Peter's mug untouched on the shelf, the one with a small chip near the handle. For some reason, that almost broke me. Not the money, not the papers, the mug. I held it in both hands and stood in the dark kitchen, letting the house settle around me. Then I went upstairs, opened the drawer in Peter's nightstand, and found the small card he had taped beneath the wooden frame. Margaret Ellis. Private line. Call before signing anything. My hands did not shake when I dialed. Margaret Ellis answered on the second ring, as if she had been sitting beside the phone with my name already in her hand. Her voice was calm, low, and familiar, the same voice that had explained mortgages, contracts, and company filings across 3 decades of Peter's life. "Eleanor," she said, "I was hoping you would call before they came back." I sat on the edge of the bed with Peter's card between my fingers and looked at the empty space beside me. "You knew?" There was a pause long enough to be respectful, not long enough to be uncertain. Peter was concerned. Concerned. It was such a gentle word for the shadow that had been moving through my house. Margaret told me to meet her the next morning at First Harbor Bank on Mason Street. Not her office, not the house, not anywhere Daniel or Claire might expect. I slept in pieces that night, waking every hour to the sound of nothing. At 8:30, I dressed in a gray coat, flat shoes, and the pearl earrings Peter gave me on our 30th anniversary. I did not wear black. Grief had already done enough announcing. The bank smelled of floor polish and old paper. Margaret was waiting in the lobby, a slim woman in her late 60s with silver hair pulled into a neat twist and a briefcase held close to her side. She did not hug me. I appreciated that. Some mornings, kindness feels better when it keeps its hands to itself. "Are you ready?" she asked. I nodded, though I was not. A bank officer led us through a locked door and down a short hallway to a private viewing room. The safe deposit box was longer than I expected, made of dull gray metal, with 2 keys required to open it. Margaret used one. I used the small brass key Peter had hidden inside an old eyeglass case in his dresser drawer. The lock turned with a sound so ordinary, it almost seemed cruel. Inside were 4 things. A sealed envelope with my name written in Peter's careful handwriting, a blue folder marked Whitmore Family Trust, a small flash drive in a plastic sleeve, and a stack of documents bound with a black clip. I reached first for the envelope. My fingers rested on his handwriting for several seconds before I opened it. The letter was only 1 page. Peter had never wasted words when the truth was enough. "My dearest Eleanor, if you are reading this, then I am gone, and someone has tried to rush you. I am sorry I could not shield you from the moment, but I have tried to shield you from the consequences. Do not sign anything Daniel brings you unless Margaret has reviewed it. Do not trust Claire with keys, accounts, or sympathy. I wanted our son to choose decency without being forced. I fear he may choose comfort instead." I read the last line twice. I fear he may choose comfort instead. It was not anger in Peter's words. That was what made them hurt. It was sorrow sharpened into preparation. Margaret opened the blue folder and turned it toward me. 6 months ago, Peter amended the trust. He added a protective clause. My eyes moved over the legal language, slow at first, then faster as the meaning became clear. If any beneficiary, spouse of a beneficiary, or representative attempted to pressure me, mislead me, isolate me, remove me from the marital residence, obtain unauthorized control of financial instruments, or persuade me to sign legal authority within 90 days of Peter's death, that beneficiary's access would be frozen pending formal review. Daniel's name was there. Claire's name was not, but she was everywhere between the lines. I looked up. The authorization papers from last night. Margaret's mouth tightened. "Keep them. Do not mark them. Do not return them." She slid the clipped stack across the table. Bank inquiries. Email copies. Notes from Peter. Dates I remembered as ordinary evenings were listed beside attempts to access company accounts, trust records, property appraisals. Claire had not begun after the funeral. She had simply stopped pretending after it. I placed Peter's letter back on the table and smoothed it with my palm. For one foolish second, I wanted to turn around and find him standing behind me, waiting to explain everything in that steady voice of his. But the room held only fluorescent light, metal walls, and the truth. Margaret waited until I was finished reading. "Eleanor, the clause is strong, but it works best if they reveal intent clearly." I folded the letter once, then again. "Then we let them talk," I said. My voice sounded different in that little bank room. Not loud, not bitter, just awake. Margaret did not take me to her office after we left the bank. She drove me 3 blocks to a quiet breakfast place behind the post office, the kind of place Peter used to visit when he wanted eggs, coffee, and no one asking him about square footage. We sat in a corner booth beneath a framed photograph of the old Greenwich train station. Margaret ordered tea. I ordered toast and did not touch it. She opened her briefcase and placed a thin folder on the table between us. "There is one more person you need to know about," she said. "Linda Parker." I remembered the name immediately. Linda had worked as Peter's bookkeeper for almost 20 years, a narrow woman with red reading glasses and a habit of bringing homemade banana bread to the office every Christmas. She retired the year before, or so I had been told. "Why?" I asked. Margaret lowered her voice. "Because Linda was not ready to retire. She was pushed." I looked at the folder, but did not reach for it. Some truths have weight before you touch them. Margaret explained that 2 years earlier, Linda had noticed unusual requests coming through Daniel's email account. Nothing illegal on its face. Copies of property valuations, draft ownership charts, questions about what would happen if Peter became medically unable to sign. At first, Linda assumed Daniel was trying to understand the company. Then she noticed the language in the messages did not sound like him. Too polished, too strategic, too much like Claire. Peter asked Linda to forward everything to him quietly, Margaret said. That is when he began documenting. I stared out the window at people walking past with paper cups and winter coats, living ordinary mornings while mine kept unfolding into something colder. Did Daniel know? I asked. Margaret took a careful breath. I think Daniel knew enough to look away. That answer was worse than yes. Yes would have given me a wall to push against. Looking away was fog. It moved around guilt and called itself helplessness. Margaret slid a printed email toward me. I read only 3 lines before the room seemed to sharpen. Claire had asked Linda whether a surviving spouse could be declared unable to manage complicated financial decisions if multiple family members expressed concern. The message was written 8 months before Peter died. 8 months before the funeral flowers. 8 months before Claire stood in my kitchen telling me I needed rest. I placed the page back down. My hand was steady. That almost frightened me. Peter saw this? I asked. Margaret nodded. He saw all of it. I thought of those final months, how he had become quiet after dinner, how he sometimes stood in the doorway of his office with one hand on the frame, listening to the house before closing himself inside. I had thought he was tired. He was building a shield out of paper because paper lasts longer than promises. Why did he not tell me? My voice came out smaller than I wanted. Margaret softened then, but only slightly. Because he hoped he was wrong about Daniel. He also knew you would try to fix the family before protecting yourself. I wanted to deny it. I could not. For years, I had treated peace like a room I could keep clean if I worked hard enough. I swept up Claire's small insults. I polished Daniel's excuses. I opened the door every holiday and pretended the air did not smell of resentment. Peter had seen what I refused to name. Margaret closed the folder. The clause can protect you, but only if we let them create a clear record. No confrontation yet. No warning. Keep the authorization papers. Save every message. Let them request, pressure, explain, and insist in their own words. I looked at my untouched toast, now cold on the plate. So I go home and act like the same grieving old woman they think I am. Margaret met my eyes. No. You go home and let them act like themselves. That sentence stayed with me all the way back to the house. When I pulled into the driveway, Claire's white SUV was already parked near the garage. She was early. Of course she was. Through the front window, I could see her silhouette moving in my living room, bending over the side table where Peter kept his address book. For the first time since his funeral, I did not feel surprised. I sat in the car, folded Linda Parker's email into my purse, and gave Claire 5 more minutes to make herself useful. Claire was not startled when I opened the front door. That was how I knew she had already decided the house was partly hers. She stood in the living room with Peter's old address book open in one hand and a pen in the other, wearing a cream sweater, pressed slacks, and the careful expression of someone caught doing something she planned to explain as kindness. "Eleanor," she said, closing the book too late. I thought I would update the contact list for thank you notes. I set my purse on the entry table and removed my gloves one finger at a time. Peter wrote those names over 40 years. Some of them are dead. Some of them still owe him money. None of them need updating by you. Her mouth tightened, then relaxed into pity. I was beginning to recognize that look. It was the face she wore when she wanted me to seem unreasonable. "I know this is difficult," she said. "That is why Daniel and I think we need a proper meeting. Not emotional. Practical. Tomorrow afternoon. We invited someone who can help explain options." "What kind of someone?" "A financial transition advisor." The title was long enough to hide its purpose. I looked at the address book in her hand until she placed it back on the table. "And Margaret Ellis?" Claire blinked. "This is not really a legal meeting." Of course it was not. Legal meetings require truth. I told her I would be there. I did not tell her Margaret would be listening from her office, and I did not tell her that the small recorder Margaret had recommended would fit neatly inside the inner pocket of my cardigan. The next afternoon, Daniel arrived first, carrying a folder and avoiding every room that still smelled like his father's pipe tobacco. Claire came behind him with a man named Bradley Foster, who shook my hand too firmly and called me Mrs. Whitmore in the tone people use with patients and donors. We sat in the sunroom because Claire suggested it would feel less formal. Peter had loved that room. In winter, he would sit there with coffee and read the business section while snow gathered along the windowsills. Now Bradley spread charts across the wicker table as if he were selling me a vacation package. "At this stage," he began, "the goal is to reduce stress and simplify decision-making." Claire nodded, watching me. Daniel rubbed his forehead. I folded my hands in my lap. What decisions are you trying to simplify? Bradley glanced at Claire before answering. Property management, estate communication, liquidity planning, and temporary authority. Temporary. They love that word. Temporary made surrender sound harmless. Claire leaned forward. Eleanor, no one is taking anything from you. We are trying to prevent confusion. You have had a terrible loss, and frankly, some of this may be too complicated right now. Complicated for whom? I asked. Her eyes flickered. For you. There it was. Clear enough for paper. Clear enough for Margaret. Daniel finally spoke. Mom, just sign the limited authorization. It lets me step in for 90 days. 90 days. The exact window Peter had named. I looked at my son and saw the little boy who once brought me dandelions in a paper cup. Then I saw the man who had learned to place paperwork where love should have been. And if I refuse? Claire answered before Daniel could. Then people may begin to question whether you are making decisions in your own best interest. The room went quiet. Even Bradley stopped moving his pen. I let the silence sit there until it became uncomfortable for everyone except me. Then I reached for the folder, opened it, and looked at the signature page. I did not sign. I only traced the blank line with my eyes and closed it again. I will have my attorney review this, I said. Claire's face hardened. Daniel whispered my name like a warning. I stood slowly. You invited a stranger into my sunroom to explain my own life to me. Do not be surprised that I brought someone who understands it better. Claire did not know what that meant yet, but she would. Margaret scheduled the meeting for Friday at 10 in the morning, not because Claire requested it, but because Margaret wanted every calendar invitation, every document, and every witness in one place. Her office was on the third floor of a brick building near the courthouse, with tall windows overlooking a line of maple trees just beginning to lose their leaves. I arrived early. I wore a navy dress, low heels, and Peter's watch. It had always been too large for my wrist, but that morning its weight steadied me. Margaret met me in the lobby and said only, "Let them speak first." By 10 o'clock, Daniel and Claire arrived together. Bradley Foster came behind them carrying the same leather folder from my sunroom. Claire looked polished and confident, her blonde hair pinned neatly, her handbag resting on her forearm like a small trophy. Daniel looked as though he had not slept. When he saw me, he tried to smile. It did not reach his eyes. We sat around Margaret's conference table, a long glass surface so clean it reflected every nervous hand. Claire began before anyone asked her to. We are glad you agreed to be reasonable, Eleanor. This has been stressful for everyone, and we truly believe Peter would want Daniel to keep things moving. Margaret folded her hands. Before we discuss movement, I would like to review the documents you brought to Mrs. Whitmore. Bradley cleared his throat and slid the authorization across the table. Margaret read in silence. Claire watched her with the patience of someone waiting for an old woman to be corrected. Then Margaret placed the paper down and opened her own folder. Mrs. Whitmore will not be signing this. Claire's expression cooled. May I ask why? Because it directly triggers a protective provision in the Whitmore Family Trust. Daniel looked up. What provision? Margaret removed a document stamped and notarized 6 months before Peter's death. She turned to a marked page. Her voice remained even as she read the clause aloud. Any beneficiary, spouse of a beneficiary, advisor, or representative who attempts to pressure, mislead, isolate, displace, or obtain financial authority from Eleanor Grace Whitmore within 90 days of Peter Whitmore's death shall have related access, distributions, voting influence, and management privileges immediately frozen pending independent review. No one moved. The room seemed to empty of air without making a sound. Claire's lips parted, but no words came. Bradley looked at the authorization as if it had changed shape. Daniel stared at the page in front of Margaret, then at me. Mom, he said quietly, you knew about this? I looked at my son. I thought of the dandelions in the paper cup, the scraped knees, the college tuition, the first house Peter and I helped him buy because Claire wanted a better school district before they had children. I thought of every time I had mistaken silence for peace. I knew enough to wait, I said. Claire found her voice. This is ridiculous. We were helping her. Anyone can see she has been overwhelmed. Margaret opened another folder. That word appears several times in the emails Mrs. Foster sent to Linda Parker last year. Claire froze. It was the first honest thing her face had done all morning. Margaret continued, placing copies on the table one by one. Bank inquiries. Property notes. The message about whether a surviving spouse could be challenged by family concern. The recording transcript from the sunroom. Claire looked at Daniel, but he did not look back quickly enough to save her. Daniel, Margaret said, your access to trust management is suspended effective immediately until review is complete. My son turned pale. I did not understand all of it, he whispered. No, I said. You understood enough to bring me papers. That hurt him. I saw it. I let it hurt. Claire leaned back in her chair, suddenly smaller inside her expensive clothes. Peter would never do this to his family. I touched the watch on my wrist. Peter did this because he understood families should not need to be stopped from taking advantage of a widow. The room went still again. This time, I did not fill the silence. I had spent too many years doing that for them. After the meeting, no one followed me to the elevator. Claire stayed behind with Bradley, speaking in a low, sharp voice that finally sounded like the person she had been hiding. Daniel stood near the conference room door with his hands at his sides, looking less like a grown man than a boy who had wandered too far from home and could not remember the way back. He said my name once. I stopped, but I did not turn around immediately. There are moments when a mother has to choose whether love will remain love or become permission. When I faced him, his eyes were wet, but tears are not always repentance. Sometimes they are only the sound a person makes when consequences arrive. I thought I was helping, he said. I looked at him for a long time. No, Daniel. You thought helping your wife and keeping your inheritance could be the same thing. His face folded around the truth. I wanted to touch his cheek. I wanted to smooth his hair the way I had when he was small and feverish and afraid of thunderstorms. But Peter was gone, and I had no one left to protect me from my own tenderness. So I kept my hands around my purse and walked into the elevator with Margaret beside me. In the weeks that followed, the review began. Claire sent one message through an attorney, then another through Daniel, then stopped when Margaret answered both with documents instead of emotion. Bradley Foster removed his name from the matter as if he had never been in my sunroom. Daniel's trust access remained frozen. The company board appointed an independent manager, someone Peter had respected, and for the first time in years, decisions were made without Claire hovering in the doorway. The house became quiet again, but not the same quiet as before. This time, it belonged to me. I moved slowly through each room and chose what stayed, what was donated, and what could leave without taking anything from my heart. Peter's mug went into a small box wrapped in dish towels. His watch stayed on my dresser. The rest of the house, all 7,000 square feet of polished floors, guest rooms, and echoing halls, began to feel like a museum built for a life that had already closed. By spring, I sold it under the trust terms and used part of the proceeds to create the Peter Whitmore Scholarship Fund for first-generation college students studying urban planning. Peter would have liked that. He believed buildings mattered, but people mattered more. I bought a small cottage near Cape Cod, not on the water, but close enough to hear gulls when the wind came from the east. It had 2 bedrooms, a narrow porch, and a kitchen with yellow morning light. Daniel came to see me 3 months later. He looked thinner. He stood on my porch holding a paper bag from a bakery and apologized without Claire's name in every sentence. That was the first apology I believed. I let him sit at my table. I poured coffee. I did not give him back the keys to my life. Healing is not the same as returning. Forgiveness is not the same as forgetting where the door is. Some evenings, I sit on the porch with Peter's old blanket over my knees and watch the sky change over the marsh grass. I still miss him in ordinary ways. I miss his laugh from the next room. I miss his hand reaching for mine in grocery store parking lots. But I no longer feel helpless inside the space he left behind. Claire thought widowhood would make me easy to move. Daniel thought silence meant agreement. They both misunderstood the kind of woman age can create. A woman my age does not need revenge. She needs the truth, a good lawyer, and the courage to stop begging for love from people who only came close when they smelled money.